And we are recording. Go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone. Chris Holbrook, Chair of the Libertarian Party. With me today is Dr. Scott Jensen, State Senator from Chaska, who would be giving us an in-person discussion at our convention tomorrow, which is not being allowed to physically happen. So he's kind enough to give us a video interview at this point. We have a bazillion topics to go over. We're not going to be able to talk about everything in our limited time. I know we were going to talk about the marijuana legalization bill you had brought forth. We're going to talk about our ballot access bill, which I want to circle back to. But let's start, first of all, with the horse in the room, obviously the coronavirus situation. And I first want to say, you've been putting out some amazing content, positions of the contrarian view, as many of us have, supported by data that many of us are seeing. It seems like on media right now, everyone's an expert. They're labeling other people for their beliefs. The video you put out yesterday was great. So my first two questions: where can people go to find these videos, which you've recorded the last couple of days, which are 5 to 10 minutes? And then if you could pick up in the middle of the one you did yesterday, without getting into all the data, but the impacts of the actions, the solution to this problem at this point.
Well, first off, I do have a Senate Facebook page, so anybody can follow me on that and see all my videos, because whatever I post personally, I've got 2 Facebook pages. It would be on that page. Circling back to yesterday, I think it's important to realize that what we should be doing when we're talking about epidemiologic modeling is we should be doing science. And science by its nature is observe, measure, hypothesize, and then set up experiments to determine whether or not those hypotheses are correct or not. Well, we have had 2.5 months to gather data from countries like China and South Korea, places like Singapore and Hong Kong, Italy, Spain, the United States, and many states there. And what we found is we actually have allowed inadvertently some errors to creep into the way we're calculating lethality rates and things like that. In the Wuhan district, we have every reason to believe that there are hundreds of thousands of more cases than have been confirmed. In other words, the idea that for every confirmed case of COVID-19, there might be 10 more. Even Minnesota Department of Health people have said it may well be 100 more for every one that's been identified. When you identify that and start to put that into your calculations, what you end up with is a much lower lethality rate. The other thing that we didn't realize was, and we learned this from the Diamond Princess cruise ship, is that we thought that probably at least 75% of people that would contract COVID-19 would have triggering symptoms that would give us a hint that they might be ill. But the fact of the matter is, on the Diamond Princess cruise ship, they texted everybody, they quarantined everybody, and they had over 600 positive tests. And of those, more than half of the people had no symptoms at all. So what we've learned is that there is a huge number of people that will have COVID-19 and will have no symptoms. And that also skews our data. That's why there are a couple of epidemiologists in England that have changed their mind and said, you know what, we need to recalibrate this. The fact of the matter is, we don't expect there to be 500,000 deaths in Britain. We think it's going to be less than 20,000. And that's because of information we've learned since, if you will, since January. But on another note, we're subjecting people to crises that they shouldn't have to be subjected to. When we close schools without knowing what we're doing exactly, that isn't a good thing. Singapore and Hong Kong had parallel opportunities to do that. One closed schools, one didn't. And the data actually showed that it didn't matter. We're closing schools and then bringing everybody back into the schools so that there can be childcare provided. This may not be making any sense at all. We're socially isolating people. And that monster of mental illness hasn't gone away. It may not be talked about as much as it was 3 months ago, but I kid you not. I would tell everybody, when government starts to dictate how we're going to live our lives, we've got a problem. We've got people just hanging on. And when they're living in a small apartment looking at 4 walls and they don't have anybody to reach out to, those mental health challenges become very real. We had a young person commit suicide last week, despairing over the present situation. When we sever the support structure that our seniors and our challenged and our disabled have, we are at some point going to cause deaths. We are going to have people whose medications are going to be interrupted. Their blood thinning medicines may be interrupted. Their congestive heart failure medicines may be interrupted. Their diabetes medicines may be interrupted. They may not show up on a nifty dashboard where you see every few seconds an update on how many cases and how many deaths, but they're just as dead. And when we start to talk about that, we have got to ask ourselves, are we doing stuff? Are we doing things that make sense? Or are we getting siloed into sort of a group think where we're not really hearing the broad conversation, the narrative? And that narrative needs to come from more than just Republicans and Democrats. It needs to come from libertarians. It needs to come from independents. And that segues right into why I feel so passionately, Chris, that the Libertarian Party needs to flourish. I know that you want to ask some specific questions, but this issue of fairness and ballot access has somewhere along the line got to be elevated to the top of the list.
Yep, thank you very much. I wholeheartedly agree with those sentiments. Have you seen the data and the modeling that the governor based his decision on, which goes into effect today, which essentially closes 22% of businesses, puts 300,000 people out of work in Minnesota for the next 5 weeks, shelter and home order? He came out 2 days ago and said that he has seen this data, and it shows that 74,000 people in Minnesota will die if he doesn't take these actions, yet unless he did it today and I've missed it, he has not provided that data. Has he shared it with you or the legislature?
I have not had any direct conversations with Governor Walz regarding this, but I have read an article that he sent to leadership in the Senate Republican caucus. You know, it's an article called "The Hammer and the Dance," or something like that. And I read that, and there are pieces in there that I believe are helping Governor Walz make some of his decisions. But I have not seen his specific modeling. I do know that there is a software platform called COVID Act Now that has been driving the decision-making for a lot of governors in the country. And a lot of that data is now being questioned as to whether or not its assumptions were correct. And I think if you just go into COVID Act Now and try to look at both sides of it, you'll see that there may well be some real problematic issues with the assumptions they made. When we start to dig into that further, what we're going to see is we're going to see a lower lethality rate. We're going to see a dramatically increased number of people that have already had COVID-19. I don't think anybody's arguing that in a perfect world, we would have more testing capability. It would be point of service. It would be turnaround time less than 2 hours. And it should be based on serology, not antigens. Right now, we're testing for a little snippet of RNA that comes from the COVID virus. What we really want to be doing is we want to look for the antibodies so we can tell those people who have had it and recovered from it, because those folks are golden. And we want to know who they are. There's no reason why they aren't out there. They're not carriers. They've had it. They're immune. That's where we all want to get over the next 12 to 15 months. But the fact of the matter is we're not there yet. It looks good. Over the next few days, we're going to have greater capacity. That will help us do better epidemiologic recommendations. Then we can start talking about what separation techniques really work, because even there's discussion in Britain. And then lastly, we get to treatment. And the bottom line is we don't have much treatment other than get immune to it. And 90% of people won't have much trouble doing that.
Right. You know, it's interesting you mentioned the term hammer in this situation, which seems to be the only tool that government has. It's doing surgery with a chainsaw. That's the analogy some of our people are making right now. And what we're seeing, and I think you're seeing it nationwide, is that government seems to be in the way of a lot of the solutions, and reducing regulations and getting them out of the way seems to be the best thing government leaders can do right now so that the market can address the problems going on. When you look at the CDC, who banned private testing, that was a problem. the CDC is currently holding up approval of this blood prick test, which you can do at home for $50. The FDA says it's going to take them 3 months to approve the making of these masks. They say they're going to suspend fining distilleries who've converted to making hand sanitizer. It really, and specifically in Minnesota, I did want to ask you about the moratorium on hospitals and hospital beds. Because these alarming numbers the governor shared this week, we only have 235 acute response beds in Minnesota, yet we have a specific ban that does not allow hospitals and beds to be licensed. Where's the thinking in that? Has that been suspended with the emergency powers, or has the legislature brought this up?
Well, the ban on new hospital beds has not been alleviated. That was actually back in the 1980s, because it seems like every time we started a hospital bed, it got filled and more expense was associated with it. The fact of the matter is, Minnesota right now is not having any problems in terms of managing the COVID-19 patients in regards to ICU bed capability or ventilators. We actually have a tremendous number of our hospitals in Minnesota having low census, laying off employees, and not certain whether or not they'll be able to bring those employees back. I think that there was an article yesterday that came out that indicated that it looks like England is not going to have the problem with a shortage on their ICU beds that they thought they were going to have. I do think that government should try to be as minimally intrusive as possible. If we go to the preamble of the Constitution, we hear those phrases, ensure domestic tranquility and promote the general welfare. Well, how are we promoting the general welfare if we're telling people we want you to socially distance 6 feet and 10 minutes apart, and then we go out and we tell people, oh, but by the way, you two that are walking on a golf course fairway that are 15 feet apart or 50 yards apart, you're somehow violating a rule? We should be encouraging people to go to parks, go to golf courses, go fishing. Obviously, the ice isn't off the lakes yet in most places, but we want people to get out and about. I'm seeing patients that are already gaining 10, 15 pounds in a couple of weeks. The gyms are closed. They're told they can't go on the golf courses. I mean, come on, government, get out of the way if you can.
Right, exactly. And, in a time like this, a lot of us are worried about our civil liberties and our rights being suspended. I know the Department of Justice is asking to suspend due process and hold people indefinitely. The governor's admitted that he's tracking us with our cell phone data. Switching a little bit to constitutionality and practices. Yesterday, the Senate, the Congress, the House approved, first of all, nationally, a $2.2 trillion spending bill with zero transparency, which included things like $100 million for NASA, $20 billion for the post office, $35 million for JFK Center of the Arts. Here in Minnesota, we took a similar act and approved a $330 million spending bill. There was no published advanced reading. There was no shared public input allowed. There were no amendments allowed. How do you feel about that, and how do you explain that lack of transparency, and what are we getting for that $330 million?
When the bill was presented in the Senate, I got a hard copy of the bill an hour or two beforehand. And when I spoke on the floor of the Senate, I said, here we go again. There is nothing that paralyzes the power of rational thinking like fear. And so we passed a piece of legislation that in many ways is incredibly mediocre. We have provided $600 million of support for this COVID-19 pandemic, and less than 10% of that has gone to small businesses, which are the engine of our, if you will, economy here in Minnesota. In the bill we passed yesterday, each one of the 11 Native American tribes was provided $1 million. And if one of the tribes didn't want to avail themselves of it, the other 10 would get to split it up. Their level of accountability with what those dollars are used for was lax and far less than what our hospitals have to do if they are going to try to receive any of those dollars. We have the wealthiest tribe in the nation, with each of the 460 members or thereabouts receiving something like $85,000 a month just for being a member of that tribe, and we carved out $1 million for them. Mediocre legislation.
Where, on top of this, where is our surplus? You at the state have $1.5 billion of our money in surplus. Have you guys discussed giving that back to us?
That surplus melted away faster than the ice does off the lakes.
Due to this
It's gone.
situation?
Yes.
Okay. How do you, so what's the end game on this? I wanted to ask you how you see society coming out of this on the other side. How will we be interacting in the future? There's been reports, Grand Old Day in St. Paul has been canceled. The state fair says they're going on as planned at this point, but it's hard to envision that. Will we ever be at a ball game with 37,000 other people again? Are we going to start rethinking policies of mass transit, high density housing, these anti-car policies? Where do you see us being in 2 years, how we act as a society?
Well, I hope that Americans are taking what's happening very seriously. The greatest opportunities for government to intrude into our lives in a permanent and lasting manner are by way of crises. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing some government overreach. This grieves me deeply. This is not our new normal. Yes, we'll have a new normal, just as we had a new normal after 9/11, what with TSA and airports and things like that. There will be a new normal. But we need to make certain that the American Constitution is being followed and that our freedoms are being preserved. Everybody should be worried about this. Part of why this has happened is because Americans have become so detached by the reality that people die. Every year, we have 40,000 people die in this country from flu epidemics. Every year, Minnesota has 400 to 500 people die of flu. And yet, we've had 2 elderly people die of COVID-19 thus far in Minnesota, and we're acting like the sky has truly fallen. Folks, 10,000 people die every day in America. There's no guarantees. Our average lifespan is 80 years, but you're a fool if you think that you can count on next week. You got today. Live it to the best you can. But in the meantime, quit being so detached and insulated from the reality of life. And the reality of life means there is death. But if we don't have freedom, death doesn't seem so bad.
And that in no way is to minimize the importance of the elderly. It's to say we can take a surgical approach and have a care position around them that is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a chainsaw or a mallet to our entire economy. To your point, Dr. Jensen, 50,000 people a year die of suicide. 160,000 people die of other respiratory illnesses like bronchitis and emphysema. And we have not taken such drastic actions as we see happening right now. Finally, I did want to ask you about our bill, which in light of things has a lot of us in minor parties, and we've worked with the Independence Party and the Green Party. We are the 3 minor parties in Minnesota who have been trying for years to get a fair shake out of the state when it comes to ballot access. We had an editorial, I don't know if you saw it last Friday, that the 3 of us put together, myself and the chair of the other parties, requesting that the governor, the Secretary of State, someone address the situation to alleviate the mandate that we go petition for exactly 14 days at the end of May. That's our only chance to put alternative candidates on the ballot. Your bill, which you've written with us, and we've been trying to get approved for years, and we're so thankful for that, would alleviate this situation. Do you have any foresight on any action? Is this going nowhere? You had a monumental committee hearing and it got shelved. Is there any discussion? Do you have is there any hope for us with this at this time?
Chris, I would love to somehow pump a little energy into what you're trying to achieve here. But I've got to sleep at night too. And so I'm going to tell you right now, with this truncated session this time around with COVID-19, I don't think there's any appetite or any interest in discussing ballot fairness or ballot access. You're carving your own path, and it's been my privilege to try to help. We're not going to get it done this year. I would love to see the governor take a strong position and respond to your commentary that you wrote in the last couple of weeks, but I'm pessimistic. What I am optimistic about is you're getting people to think. And before a revolution can happen, people have to start thinking for themselves. And you're making that happen. You formed bridges with other third parties. You've done a magnificent job of bringing people together and identifying the common ground that you can all share so that you can all promote that fairness and access to the ballot. You're building foundational blocks, but I don't think you're going to see it get across the goal line this session.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate all you've done for us. As we wind down here, hold on one sec. I do have a little surprise. We're going to present this to you at our conference. We give out 2 awards a year, and this one, which we are presenting to you, is the Libertarian Spotlight Award to Senator Scott Jensen in honor of grit and ferocity and advancement of individual liberty through stellar activism and coalition building. So I would love to give this to you in person, but that's not possible right now. So I wanted to show it to you, and we want to make this announcement at our convention. And in the near future, we'll be delighted to actually physically get together and pass this on to you. Good luck in your future endeavors. Do you have any final comment?
I do. I am deeply touched. Thank you. You took me by surprise. You folks have been so engaged with the issues. I mean, the Thomas Jeffersons and the Ben Franklins and the founding fathers, if they were here today, they would be joining libertarian conventions. They'd be wanting to have discussions with the issues-minded approach that you folks take. It's been my privilege to help, and even though I'm not running for re-election, I still intend to be at your conventions and help promote your ideals, because your ideals and your energies come straight from the Constitution, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, you're welcome. Have a great afternoon. If you know anywhere I can get a black market haircut, since my barber's out of work for 7 weeks. Send me
mine too. I was supposed to have mine today.
And I'm feeling a little scruffy here, but all right, doctor, thank you for your time. We'll let you go.
Thanks. Is Mason going to call me or not?
Do you want to do this now?
No, we'll do it later. We'll do it.
You want to do it later?
We'll do it in person. I want
So this will be, for Dave Johnson, the end of what we're filming for our convention.
Okay.
I'm just going to turn this to Mason right now.
Oh, you're beautiful. Hi, honey.
Hey, how you doing, Mason?
You know, doing pretty rad. How's the day going?
It's going well. Anytime I see patients, it's always, it's always fun to sort of reconnect with normal people rather than the people down in St. Paul.
Yeah, rather than sociopaths. Yeah, that's probably nice.
No, I didn't say that. You did.
You guys want me to stop recording?
No. So my
you can keep it rolling.
Is when do you have time for the 3 of us to get together, have a sit down and have a little conversation, and maybe use some stuff for your own things if you want to, and then stuff for the LP and some maybe stuff for myself, and get nerdy.
I'd love to do that. I mean, honestly, if you wanted to do it next week, with the legislature not meeting, and I'm not in the office every day, if you wanted to try to do something next Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, that sounds good. And you can tell us where to go, and we'll meet you there.
Why don't we do it at my office in Chaska? It's right on 212. It's about 10 minutes away from the intersection of 494 and 212. Are you familiar with that intersection? I mean, if you just take 212 to the west, In about 10 minutes, you're at an exit called the Angler exit. And it's
I mean, all you gotta do,
1200.
all you gotta do is text us the address. Just text it to me. Don't tell it to
All right,
me.
I'll text it.
forget it.
Okay, what
We
time
should
you want to
probably
meet
leave our
there?
phones at home for the GPS tracking.
Yeah, we'll leave our phones at home for the GPS because we don't want them to know we're hanging out and all that stuff.
Congregating.
Well, we got to bring
Is it
some sort of a
possible
weapon so we can
congregating?
shoot the drones down. Why don't
Exactly.
Yeah.
you want to meet at? You want to meet at? Let's say. When does Wednesday work?
I'm free whenever you want to be.
Yeah, I am too. I'm as an outside salesman, I've been told to work from home or out of my car and not go call on customers. So I'm wide open right now.
How about 10 o'clock Wednesday morning?
Perfect.
Okay, 10 o'clock Wednesday morning. I will text you the address and we'll see you there and you'll bring all the equipment and then we'll just plan on spending an hour or two there.
Oh no, we're gonna need at least 2 hours. Don't
Okay,
you
2
start
hours.
shortchanging me right now. Don't you start cutting me short now.
All right, 10 o'clock to noon on Wednesday and I'll send you the information.
I like it.
Thank
Hey,
you,
guys, take
Scott.
care.
Thank you for your time. God
You're
bless.
welcome. You
Peace,
too.
peace,
Take
brother.
care.
Good seeing you.
Bye-bye.